Hi there, everyone. My name is Nic Sensei, and welcome to another grammar explanation video. Today, we are looking at conjunctions and conjunctive adverbs. Let's get started. We're going to look at three parts in this video. Part 1 is on conjunctions. Part 2 will move on to conjunctive adverbs. And Part 3 will look at some common errors with those conjunctions. Let's get started with Part 1, conjunctions. To start off, we'll look at the most important part in this series, which is the difference between the conjunctions and the conjunctive adverbs. So in this first example, there is increasing evidence for global warming, although, of course, some people will never believe it. The bold text there is the conjunctive adverb, of course. Compare that with the second example. There is increasing evidence for global warming, although some people will never believe it. I think the best way to see this is to actually visualize it with a picture. So let's look at one. So take a look at these two sentences. The first sentence, there is increasing evidence for global warming. Imagine that's an island. It's a separate idea, not connected to anything else. And look at the second sentence. Some people will never believe it. That's another island, right, on its own. Notice that that island, some people will never believe it, that doesn't make any sense without something connecting it. It needs more information. And the conjunction is how we say it bridges the gap. It connects the two sentences in meaning to make a complete world or a complete picture. You can't have one island without the other. So we can put them together and say there is increasing evidence for global warming, although some people will never believe it. Let's look at the function of conjunctive adverbs with another picture. Before, we said that conjunctions bridge the gap, or they connect two sentences in meaning to make a whole idea, an entire picture. Well, conjunctive adverbs don't connect the sentences, as in they're not necessary. In other words, without a conjunction, you don't have a complete sentence. But without a conjunctive adverb, you still have the complete sentence. If you just have, there is increasing evidence for global warming, although some people will never believe it. That's perfect. But if you want to give more information, you want to give more detail and more interest to your sentence, or your picture, in this case, you can include an adverb, the conjunctive adverb. Of course, here, it's adding extra meaning and showing contrast. There is increasing evidence for global warming, although, of course, some people will never believe it. That's including the author's impression that some people will never believe it, even though there's lots of evidence. The author is saying that you should believe in global warming. There's lots of evidence for it. You should believe it. But of course, there's always strange people that will not believe it. And there's nothing you can do about it. So the conjunctive adverb is really from the writer, the author. It's giving you their impression or their idea. Okay, let's move on to conjunctions in more detail. We start with coordinating conjunctions, and these are the conjunctions where they connect two sentences or two clauses of equal meaning. So there's a very fine balance between them. We'll compare these with a different kind of conjunction where the two kinds of clauses are not equal. It's really easy to remember these conjunctions because they have an acronym, which is this fanboys word there. Notice how each letter there corresponds to a conjunction. So we have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. So if you can remember fanboys, you'll remember all 7 of those conjunctions. Now let's get into their uses. So here's our first example. Look at these two separate sentences. I missed my train, so I was late for work. Notice the direct relationship between the two sentences. The correct way to combine them is I missed my train, so I was late for work. So these are coordinating conjunctions. So is a coordinating conjunction. It means equal meaning or equal importance is given to the two clauses. One is not more important than the other. I missed my train, so I was late for work. They're both equal importance, and the author wants you to think of them both equally. In other words, if you took one out, it would be an incomplete sentence. It wouldn't give you all the meaning the author wants to give you. Let's move on to another example. This is a very important example because of the usage of and. It's actually incorrect, and we'll find this out why later. I was late for work, and I forgot my purse. Once more, these are coordinating conjunctions. So both of these sentences are equally important, and there's a direct relationship to them. Here, using and means they happened very close in time, or they happened at the same time. They're a sequence of events, and you should treat them as one event. So the complete sentence is, I was late for work, and I forgot my purse. We'll also talk about this later, but notice the and, notice the comma after the word work. So this is not actually necessary in writing. It's a style point. So I always hear my students ask me, oh, Nic sensei, do you need the comma before a conjunction? We'll look at it more later, but there's no right or wrong answer. It's up to you. Let's get to a quick summary. Here's my quick summary of using these coordinating conjunctions. So as I mentioned, use these coordinating conjunctions. Do you remember what they are? Remember the fanboys acronym. So you have for, and, nor. B in boys is but, or, yet, and the S in fanboys, it's so. Good job, you got it. So remember, use these fanboys conjunctions when the two clauses are equal. They have the same importance, or you're trying to give them the same meaning to your reader, to your listener. Number two, they're mainly used within sentences and not to begin sentences. We'll look at the next set of conjunctions, which are more commonly used to begin sentences. But these ones are more commonly used within them. Remember the last two examples. So, I missed my train, so I was late for work. I was late for work, and I forgot my purse. Within the sentence. I mentioned this just before. Number three, commas are a style choice. They are absolutely not needed. Be careful, some teachers will tell you they are needed, but that's not true. It's absolutely a style choice, and it really depends what meaning you want to show. And finally, similar to number two, they're not used to begin a new sentence. They're used within sentences. We will look at conjunctive adverbs, which are more commonly used to begin a new sentence. Okay, let's look at the next kind of conjunction. The next type of conjunction is called a subordinating conjunction. And this connects two clauses that have a different relationship. In the coordinating conjunctions, remember, they were both equal. Both clauses had equal meaning. But in a simplified way to describe these kind of conjunctions, it connects a main clause with a dependent clause, or an independent clause with a dependent clause. In other words, it connects one complete idea with the dependent clause, the second clause, which gives it more information about the main clause. I'll give you some examples about this to show you. The first three conjunctions we'll look at in this category are although, and the very similarly though, as well as even though, which is used to give more emphasis. Let's go to the next example. Our first example. I said that I'd go to the beach on Thursday, though I don't want to. Can you see the relationship between them? The main clause, the independent clause, I said that I'd go to the beach on Thursday. You can read this sentence on its own, and it's a complete sentence. But the dependent clause, the one that gives extra information, is I don't want to. Without more information, I don't want to is unclear. So we use the conjunction though, the subordinating conjunction, to connect it to the main clause. And we create this complete sentence. I said that I'd go to the beach on Thursday, though I don't want to. It's showing contrast in this example. Let's look at the next one. Here's the next example. Although, or even though I wasn't supposed to be working today, I ended up coming in. Remember that phrasal verb to end up doing something means to do something in the end. It's the final result of a situation. And here we use the subordinating conjunctions although or even though. These give more emphasis, show even more contrast compared to though, which we looked at before. Notice the main clause, the independent clause, I wasn't supposed to be working today. And the dependent clause gives us extra information. I ended up coming in. Here, the second clause, the dependent clause, I ended up coming in, doesn't have a meaning unless we know the original schedule. I wasn't supposed to be working today. Let's go look at a quick summary of using these three conjunctions on the next slide. So here are some tips for using these 3 points. You'll notice there those 3 examples at the top. The first 2 are normally used in writing, which are although or even though. For example, although I don't want to go to work tomorrow, I have to. Or another writing example, I have to go to work tomorrow even though I don't want to. In contrast, though is more commonly used in speaking. For example, I have to go to work tomorrow. I don't want to, though. Notice this speaking example as well doesn't use though as a conjunction. It uses it as a sentence adverb at the end. This is more common in speaking, where you use short sentences broken up compared to longer ones connected with conjunctions. You'll also see those 2 points in the box about how to use them. Although and even though are more formal compared to though, which is more casual. And although is weaker compared to even though, which is the strongest one of both of these. Notice that depending on what conjunction you use, although is more commonly used in the beginning, where even though is more commonly used within, but it can be used at both. Okay, let's look at some more subordinating conjunctions. So we have 3 subordinating conjunctions to look at on this slide. The first one, I'm sure you've heard of it, because, probably the most common conjunction. Here's an example. I missed my train because I overslept. Notice here, I missed my train can work on its own. But the dependent clause, I overslept, is a bit unclear. Oversleep, you sleep too long for something. But without that independent clause, the main one, I missed my train, it's not clear why you use oversleep compared to just sleep. That's why we use because here to connect these two. The next one is as. Actually used the same way with the same meaning, but they're slightly different and we'll look at it a bit in the next slide. Here's the example. As we have the day off tomorrow, why don't we go somewhere? Notice the structure difference here. As comes at the beginning. That's a big hint compared to because. Compare that with since as well. The example here, since I've quit my job, I can go on holiday whenever I want. Again, since comes at the beginning of the sentence. And in these two examples, notice the relationship between the clauses. The first one with as, we have the day off tomorrow. That can exist on its own. Why don't we go somewhere? That's the extra, the dependent clause. It's showing the result of the first one. Similarly, in the third example was since. I've quit my job. So the dependent clause, the result of that is I can go on holiday whenever I want. Remember the connection in meaning when using these two, and the structure. Let's look at the structure and the usage in the next slide. Let's finish looking at these three conjunctions with a look at their usage. So you can see that because is used in both speaking and in writing. And it's the same as. I agree with this point, since it is used more commonly in speaking, but it's definitely acceptable in written. It gives a more formal tone when it's used in writing, but it's more casual when it's used in speaking. The most important part is using because to introduce new information. It's completely new or slightly unexpected to the listener. We use as in since to introduce perhaps known information or information that is relatively clear or easy to guess, but we use as or since to emphasize that it's true. And the absolute most important part about the usage of these three is their location in the sentence. You can see as and since can mainly be used in the beginning of the sentence, but they're used all the time within the sentence. However, because is never used to begin the sentence. I say never 95% of the time. You know if it's being used at the beginning of the sentence that it's giving you a lot of emphasis on that first dependent clause. So remember, because introduces new information, and because that information depends on the main clause, the first clause, it's almost always used within the sentence. It introduces the new information last. So really keep that point in mind. Don't begin your sentences with because. If you want to begin your sentence with a conjunction because you're giving new information or information that's already known, use as or since. Now, because we're finished those, let's move on to the next subordinating conjunctions. Our next two subordinating conjunctions are actually a pair of them. They both use even for emphasis. So the first one is even if. Even if it's difficult, I'll do my best. Remember the dependent clause, it's difficult. I'll do my best, the main clause, works on its own. And we use even if to introduce that second point. Even if it's difficult, I'll do my best. I'll do my best no matter what. Even if it's difficult, even if it's easy. I'll do my best. Similar meaning with even though, but it's even more emphasized. For example, I said that I'd go to the beach on Thursday, even though I don't want to. It's even more emphasized. I don't want to go to the beach. I really don't want to go to the beach. But I said that I'd go. That's what the meaning is. It gives that emphasis. Let's look at a summary of these structures and their uses. Now, here's a quick important summary about their uses here. So for even if it's difficult, I'll do my best. For using even if, it's always based on a guess, or what we call a supposition. Here, we don't know if it's difficult or not, but it doesn't matter. I'll do my best no matter what. Compare that with even though it's difficult, I'll do my best. Here, there's a known fact. I know it's difficult. Whatever we're talking about, the exam or the test, we know it will be difficult. but I will do my best. So keep that in mind. Even if it's a guess, we don't know the outcome. Even though we do know the outcome. Very important point between those. Now let's look at some of our last set of coordinating conjunctions. Or subordinating conjunctions. My mistake. This is our second last set of subordinating conjunctions, and these ones are some of the trickiest to get from Japanese into English. The first one, I went to work after I made my coffee. Notice the past tense in both these clauses. You have to be consistent when using the past tense. In this case, the action after the conjunction happened first. So I made a coffee, and then I went to work. I went to work after I made a coffee. The next one is when. When I got home, I changed my clothes. Notice that both of these also come in the past tense. And notice this has a very similar meaning as after, in that the second action, I changed my clothes, happened after I got home. But it emphasizes a closer connection, where after is any time after, when is quite soon after I got home. And this even further is once. This has the exact timing, or just after, compared to a bit after with when. So once I got home, our example, I changed my clothes. This means I changed my clothes almost right after I got home. I got home and the very next thing I did, very quickly, is I changed my clothes. So notice the difference in timing with these three. Let's look at some usage points to further emphasize this. So you can see a variety of points here. And as I mentioned with after, it's any time after. You do something after another action, that action is at some point, but it's not very soon. You can see this is used in both writing and in speaking, and it's quite casual. Casual or formal. With when compared to after, this implies a closer timing between the two actions. So when I got home, I changed my clothes. That is closer. Those two actions happened closer together compared to after I got home. I changed my clothes. When is also a casual phrasing, but it is used in formal situations. For once, though, the most important thing is it's slightly formal, but really emphasizing it's right after. You can see suku, it's right away. If you say, I will go eat dinner once I finish studying, that means as soon as you finish. You'll finish and then boom, you are going to study. So that's the most important difference between these two. Now let's finish off this last set of coordinating conjunctions. Our last set of coordinating conjunctions is unless and if. The first one, unless, is if not, has a very similar meaning. So here's the example. I can't go out tonight unless I finish all of my work. In other words, if I don't finish all of my work, I can't go out tonight. It describes something that must be done first. So I must finish all of my work, or I can't go out tonight. For if, it is the classic conditional phrasing. So for this example, if I fail this class, I'll have to repeat another year. So it describes what must be done if a condition is met, or if something is true, then we have this happen. And in this case, it means I'll have to repeat another year, but only if I fail this class. I don't know if I will or not, but if I do, I will have to repeat it. Let's look at some usage notes and more examples of these two. The most important point of these two is they can show the same meaning depending on how you structure and you write your sentence. So you can see in the usage notes there that unless has a strong nuance, a strong meaning. But compare that with if, and there's no nuance. We do have the phrase if not, which has a not as strong as unless, but definitely a stronger, more emphasized nuance than if. So look at this first sentence. I won't go to the party unless you do. So in other words, if you don't go to the party, I won't go either. I won't go to the party either. And these are different ways to say the same thing. Remember the difference. Unless is emphasized and is also slightly more formal, but it's very emphasized. They're both used in speaking and writing, so you can use these three phrases depending on the structure to change your emphasis, depending how strong you want to be. Let's move on to part 2 now with conjunctive adverbs. Part 2 of this lecture looks at conjunctive adverbs. You saw in the previous section with conjunctions, they combine clauses into one sentence. Very important, conjunctive adverbs connect two sentences in meaning. The sentences stay separate, but the conjunctive adverb, that word, shows how they are related in meaning. Let's look at the first set. Our first set of conjunctive adverbs all show you how to give additional information. It shows that one sentence is giving extra information about a previous sentence. So the best way is to look at examples. Let's get started. The first example, this one uses furthermore. The position is highly paid and has flexible working hours. Furthermore, the office is centrally located. So, what is this giving in extra or additional information about? The subject of the previous sentence, right? We're giving additional information about the position. It shows where the job, we're talking about a job position, where the job position will be done. And it will be done at the office. What about it? The office is centrally located. It's in a good location in the city. The next example. The position is highly paid and has flexible working hours. Moreover, the office is centrally located. Moreover is slightly more formal than furthermore. Other than that, they have identical meanings. The position is highly paid and has flexible working hours. Also, the office is centrally located. This is even more casual than the previous examples. So, moreover, the most formal, furthermore, and then also, quite casual. And the most casual phrasing is the last one. The position is highly paid and has flexible working hours. Besides, the office is centrally located. Besides is the most casual way to describe additional information, and it's mostly used in speaking. Let's get on to the next one. You might be thinking, can I write these two sentences as one using a conjunction? Of course you can. It's the same as using and. That furthermore, moreover, also, and besides, they can all be replaced with and in one sentence. For example, the position is highly paid, has flexible working hours, and the office is centrally located. Let's get on to the next set of conjunctive adverbs. Our next set of conjunctive adverbs show contrast. It shows the difference between meaning between the two sentences. Think of these as but from those fanboys conjunctions earlier, the coordinating conjunctions. The first one is however. For example, that restaurant has delicious food, a positive point. However, it's impossible to get a booking, a negative point about the restaurant, contrasting good and bad points about the restaurant. The next one, on the other hand, see how I gave you a visual representation. There are many merits of the technology. A good point in one hand, On the other hand, a whole new area of problems have arisen as a result of technology. A casual way to show contrast. In one hand, a positive, in the other hand, a negative. Finally, meanwhile, a very formal phrasing. On the other hand is casual, however, is neutral, more formal than casual, but meanwhile is definitely formal. The last example. When I finished high school, I got a job. Meanwhile, all of my friends went to university. That's the most formal one. Let's get into a very common error between but and however, though. As I mentioned before, using however is a neutral word, but in general, conjunctive adverbs are more formal compared to conjunctions. So look at this set of sentences. The first one is the most formal. That is, however, quite a difficult task. Putting however within your sentence is quite formal and more commonly used in writing. If you use it in speaking, it sounds very formal and very businesslike. I would avoid it. Number 2, I was hungry. However, I didn't eat anything. This is common in speaking and writing, but it's more common in writing. Number 3, of course, you'll only see this in writing, and this is a very formal phrasing. I like using semicolons, and it's a very advanced way to write. So try using this. I was hungry, semicolon. However, I didn't eat anything. The last use of however is at the end of a sentence. I didn't eat lunch, however. Using this in a single sentence, we looked at it earlier. When you put an adverb at the end, this is more casual and more common in speaking compared to writing. So this use of however, number 4, is great for speaking. And of course, number 5 is the most common and most casual phrasing when you're speaking, using but, because however is more formal. Number 5, I was hungry, but I didn't eat anything. Okay, let's move on to the next set of conjunctive adverbs. Our next set of conjunctive adverbs show the result of something, the result of one sentence and resulting in the next sentence. Number 1, consequently, very formal phrasing. She didn't like the present. Consequently, she gave it away. She didn't like it. Oh, well, I don't want this. I will give it to someone else. Consequently, she gave it away. Very formal. The next one, therefore, more formal than casual, but similar to however, it's neutral, one of the most common conjunctive adverbs. She studied the most. Therefore, her grades were the best. The result, she studied the most, and her grades were the highest. It makes sense. And the last one is thus, probably the most formal phrasing of these three, although consequently and thus are very formal and never used in speaking. Are never used in writing because they're formal. And the example, she studied the most, thus her grades were the best. Imagine that is a formal essay where the second example with therefore is a conversation between maybe a speaker, a teacher, and a student because it's more casual. Let's move on to the next set of conjunctive adverbs. This set of conjunctive adverbs shows the result, but also emphasizes the result. And it shows both contrast and the result. So the first example, or the first conjunctive adverb, instead. I'm sure you've heard it before. One of the most common words in English. I didn't study last night. Instead, I went to a party. Shows the result and contrast. I didn't study last night. I did something the opposite. I went to a party. The next one, otherwise. Formal. More formal than casual, but also has a slightly negative nuance. Look at this example. I still have a bit of a sore throat. Otherwise, I'm fine. Otherwise really emphasizes the neutral, the negative meaning of I'm fine. Here, I'm fine means so-so. I'm not great, but I'm okay. And finally, the last one, still. My father is not perfect. Still, I love him. You can also phrase this as however, but still emphasizes, even though he's not perfect, I love him. It says, despite this fact, I love him, compared to however, just showing contrast. It's an emphasized version of those contrast conjunctive adverbs. Let's get on to the next difficult conjunctive adverb. Namely is one of those rarely used conjunctive adverbs in most cases because it's quite formal and it has a specific meaning, but it's still very useful. Look at the example here. There are currently many societal problems in Japan. Namely, the population has been decreasing for 6 consecutive years now. So look at the first sentence. Currently, many societal problems in Japan. We have many problems. We use namely to name one of them or to give an example of one of them. There are many societal problems in Japan. Namely, here's one. The population has been decreasing. So use it when you want to emphasize one object within a group. And let's move on to a reminder before we finish this section. I hope you noticed 3 points in all the previous examples, but let's repeat them one more time. Number 1, don't use them to connect clauses. What do you use to connect clauses? You use a conjunction, of course. Number 2, always use them at the beginning of a new sentence or after a semicolon or colon. Notice they're always used after a very strong punctuation mark. The beginning of a new sentence comes after a period or a semicolon and colon, never after a comma, like a conjunction. And the last one, they add additional meaning to the previous sentence. So you connect 2 sentences, and this word gives extra meaning to the first sentence. Now let's move on to the last part of this discussion and look at common errors with conjunctions. English teachers at Fruitful English usually find these 3 errors the most when they're looking at student writing and conjunctions. So number 1, this is my personal one that I find the most, is using more than one in a sentence. The second one is using too many conjunctions in long sentences. And the third one is a bit rare, but it happens, and it's using conjunctions where the meaning isn't clear, because you might notice that some conjunctions have many meanings. So let's look at a few examples of each of these, starting with number 1. Let's look at 2 examples of using too many conjunctions in one sentence. So the most important point is you can only use one conjunction to connect 2 clauses. So the first example here, since Tom was out of the country, therefore I replaced him. There's 2 errors here. First, we're using 2 words to connect one clause, since and therefore. So what's wrong here? Well, since is already a conjunction. So how about we take out therefore? For the first correct example, since Tom was out of the country, I replaced him. What's wrong with therefore, though? Remember, we just talked about them. Therefore is a conjunctive adverb, not a conjunction. So you can't use it after a comma here. You can only use it after a semicolon, a colon, or a period, because it connects complete sentences. So one way to write this is, Tom was out of the country, semicolon, therefore I replaced him. Of course, you could write 2 sentences. Tom was out of the country, period. Therefore, I replaced him. Both are fine. The next example, because it is raining today, so I will take an umbrella. Ooh, sounds strange just speaking it. First off, we don't need 2 conjunctions, so let's get rid of because. It is raining today, so I will take an umbrella. Okay, but can we just remove so and say because it is raining today, I will take an umbrella? No, right? Because is one of the only conjunctions you can't use to begin a sentence. It's just not done in English. Sounds awkward. So let's write, I will use an umbrella because it is raining today. We just change the structure and we can still use because. Let's look at an example of using too many conjunctions. So we have a really long sentence here. Let's count along with me. I don't have any plans for tomorrow because the typhoon is coming, but I really want to go shopping, so I might go out after the typhoon has passed. 4 conjunctions. If you can hear me trying to speak it, I have to take a breath in between. It's very long. So think about what you want to emphasize here. There are no specific rules when you separate these sentences. It's up to you. What do you want to emphasize? When you create a separate sentence, that shows emphasis. So let's look at the first example here. I don't have any plans for tomorrow because the typhoon is coming. So these is what exists, right? We already know this. I don't have any plans tomorrow because the typhoon is coming. This is known. So we can separate that from your desire. I really want to go shopping, so I might go out after the typhoon has passed. The first example is I don't have any plans tomorrow because the typhoon is coming. We know this, so the second sentence describes our desire, what we might do later. It's not decided yet. Or here's another way to say it. I don't have any plans for tomorrow. Very emphasized. One single sentence. I don't have any plans for tomorrow. The typhoon is coming, but I really want to go shopping. We know the typhoon is coming, but I want to do this, even though the typhoon is coming. So then we can use another sentence. I might go out after the typhoon has passed. First, I don't have any plans. The second sentence describes what we want to do but can't. And the third one describes our uncertainty, what we haven't decided yet. Let's look at another one of these examples to practice. So here's the first example. I've been trying not to work overtime since I started working for this company, but sometimes it's necessary to meet a deadline, so I guess it can't be helped. Again, how many conjunctions do we have? 3. It's not a bad sentence, but think about what you want to emphasize and try making it a bit simpler. So, the first example, I've been trying not to work overtime since I started working for this company. That's a good sentence on its own. But now we do contrast. So try using a conjunctive adverb. However, sometimes it's necessary to meet a deadline. Then use a single sentence at the end to give some punch, to give some emphasis. I guess it can't be helped. Shogunai, right? I can't do anything about it. I have to work hard. But you can also write this a different way. Try using even though. Even though I've been trying not to work overtime. Starting with this emphasis, right? Even though has lots of strength. Even though I've been trying not to work overtime, ever since I started working for this company, sometimes it's necessary to meet a deadline. I guess it can't be helped. Notice we only use 2 phrases to connect there. And then again, we have that single sentence at the end. I guess it can't be helped. A nice ending. And one last example. This is a good usage of ever since. Ever since I started working for this company, I've been trying not to work overtime, but sometimes it's necessary to meet a deadline. I guess it can't be helped. Even the first sentence was okay, but it's nice using that last sentence, I guess it can't be helped, in these alternatives to give your writing a bit of extra punch. Let's move on to another example. I was relieved after the exam finished because I was able to complete every question. Last time, I couldn't answer all the questions because the questions were really difficult. How many times did we use questions? 3 times there? So, don't use too many conjunctions. And when you're connecting sentences with conjunctions, don't repeat information that is obvious. Here's an example. I was able to complete every question on the example, so I was relieved when it finished. Last time, I couldn't. I couldn't answer all the questions because the questions were really difficult. You could also say, last time I couldn't because they were really difficult, meaning the questions. So there's no wrong or right answer, but always try and do a bit of simplification and never repeat if you can help it. Never repeat the same noun. Try and use pronouns. Let's do some more examples to help you out. Here's another tricky example of using conjunctions that have an unclear meaning. So here's the sentence. While I do all the housework, he just watches TV. Can you see why this is unclear? Remember that while has two meanings as a conjunction. It can mean at the same time, or it can mean contrast, as in however or but. So here we don't know if it's a negative sentence, as in the speaker does all the housework and they're annoyed he just watches TV, or it's a simple statement between I do all the housework and at the same time he just watches TV. Using just emphasizes a negative point, but it's a bit unclear. So here's some more natural alternatives. For example, even though I do all the housework, he just watches TV. Although I do all the housework, he just watches TV. Or, of course, the more formal, despite the fact that I do all the housework, he just watches TV. That's mostly used in writing, despite the fact. And remember, even though is the most emphasized, and although. Notice these all show the contrast meaning because the adverb just later. This is what's being shown here. It's not describing at the same time. Okay, let's get on to one more example. In this example, we have repetition and unclear meaning. So the sentence, as I was waiting for the train, I ate as I was hungry. Again, there's repetition of as, and in this short sentence, there's a bit too many conjunctions as well. There's two errors here. So let's try mixing our conjunctions to show a clearer meaning. In the second example, I ate as I was hungry. This could be confused as at the same time. But here we're describing the reason. So there's two ways to say this. And using as in the beginning has the same meaning as because or since. So let's be clear. For example, I ate while I was waiting for the train because I was hungry. We use while to emphasize at the same time, and because to emphasize the result of being hungry. Or I was hungry, so I ate while waiting for the train. Notice this second example also removes one subject I. We can use gerunds while waiting for the train. This is a great point for writing simpler. Okay, let's get on to one more example. This last one is not incorrect, but it's a very important point, and I hear a lot of students ask the question. Do you see what's wrong here in the example? I stayed home today, for I had a cold. If you look up in the dictionary, you'll see that for is a conjunction. But in most dictionaries you'll see, including the Oxford Dictionary, which I use for my references in books, you'll see for as a conjunction is archaic. That means it's old-fashioned and not used in common English. Imagine you're Shakespeare or a poet. You use for. But in common language, try not to use for as a conjunction. Instead, you have lots of examples. For example, I stayed home today because I had a cold, or I stayed home today since I had a cold. Both are perfect. Or the last one, which is more formal, I stayed home today due to the fact that I had a cold. That last one sounds quite wordy, so I wouldn't suggest using it unless you're only in writing. But due to the fact sounds quite complicated. So use because and since. They have one word instead of 4 words or 5, due to the fact. Okay, let's get on to one fun point before we finish. In your study career, I'm sure you've seen your teacher suggest that you shouldn't use conjunctions like but to start your sentences. I actually cover this in my Making English Fun Again textbook. But just because you can't use conjunctions in a formal situation, you can use them in a casual situation. And these are all examples from speaking. So imagine your friend says, "Hey, Nick, we're leaving now." You can say, "But I don't want to go." Normally, you don't use but to begin a sentence. But in speaking, this but shows emphasis. It's like saying, "I really don't want to go." Or saying, "Wait, we're leaving now." "Oh, but wait, I don't want to go now." Same as this next example. "Hey, Nick, let's check out this place next. The reviews look great, don't they?" "Yeah, but I have to pick up my sister in half an hour. Maybe next time." So you'll often see this very casual usage with but being preceded by yeah, or more formally, yes, or yay. So, yay, but I have to pick up my sister in half an hour. So use that casual interjection, that casual phrase, yeah, but, to start a sentence that disagrees with someone. Here, the speaker, "Let's check out this place next." They want to go right now. And me, I say, "Oh, yeah, but I can't. Sorry." It's a more formal way to say, or more casual way to say, "Sorry, I can't." So keep this in mind. And even in writing, when you should avoid using but, in speaking, it's fine to use it, especially in that phrasing at the end. Yeah, but. Yes, but. So keep that in mind. Congratulations, you made it to the end. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about sentence structure and conjunctions and conjunctive adverbs. In the beginning, we talked about conjunctions. Remember, there's two kinds of conjunctions. Coordinating conjunctions, which connect clauses with equal meaning. They need each other to complete a complete sentence. And there was also subjunctive conjunctions. Those were connecting one main clause, an independent clause, which can be on its own, and the dependent clause, which gives additional information about the main part of a sentence. And then we looked at conjunctive adverbs, which are words that give additional meaning to your sentence. Remember our pictures and analogy in the beginning. You have two clauses. They're islands. And to connect them, you use a conjunction. You build the bridge between them. If you want to give more information or make your sentence more interesting, make your picture more interesting, you can add a conjunctive adverb, that little boat. It's not necessary for your sentence, but it gives your sentence more meaning. And then at the end, we talked about some common errors with these. Some of the most important ones are: don't use because to begin your sentence. Use because within your sentences. You don't always need a comma before a conjunction. Remember, that's about style, and it's your choice. And use conjunctive adverbs to begin new sentences. Don't use them like a conjunction and use them between sentences. They're normally used after a period, a semicolon, or a colon, except in formal writing when they're used within commas. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Nic Sensei, and I'll see you in the next grammar explanation video. Bye!